Close your eyes for a second and imagine. A world where there is no Normandy, no American flag flying over Berlin, no image of American soldiers liberating Paris to the applause of its citizens. World War II still breaks out, as fierce as a sandstorm, but America stays on the sidelines, turning its back on the disaster devouring the old continent. No American soldiers cross the Atlantic, no massive supply convoys, no intense bombing raids shattering Germany. Europe, in this scenario, where would it drift? And a world without American intervention, how terrifying would it be? When World War II erupted in September 1939, America remained tightly bound in its cloak of isolation. The nightmare of World War I still haunted an entire generation, and anti-war sentiment spread across the nation. President Roosevelt, though privately worried about the threats from Europe and Asia, faced a Congress and a people unwilling to get involved. When Nazi Germany swallowed Poland, France and Britain declared war, but America did not. In fact, for nearly 2 years afterward, America maintained its neutral stance, participating only by supplying weapons and aid through programs like Lend-Lease. Had Japan not attacked Pearl Harbor in December 1941, America might never have entered the war. But in the world we are about to enter, Pearl Harbor never happens, or if it does, America still chooses to stay out. The turning point of history lies there. Just a small event, a successful negotiation, a discovered plan, or simply a hesitant political decision. And America, the sleeping giant, continues to slumber. In that context, Hitler and Germany would not face a colossal uprising from the West. No American expeditionary forces landing on the shores of France. No thousands of B-17s bombing German cities. Instead, they would face only exhausted enemies, a lonely Britain, a bleeding Soviet Union, and a European continent almost entirely occupied. Could Germany achieve absolute victory? And if so, what would the order they imposed on Europe look like? To answer this question, we must peer into Hitler's mind and his war machine. Their ambitions did not stop at the borders of France or the Balkans. It was a mad dream of a completely subjugated Europe, a greater Germany stretching from the Atlantic to the Ural Mountains, where inferior peoples were enslaved, where ancient cities became outposts of an empire lasting centuries. But first, to achieve that, Hitler needed to extinguish the two remaining flames, resilient Britain in the West and the vast Soviet Union in the East. And in a world without America, the balance of power would tilt decisively toward Germany. If 1941 arrived with America still uninvolved, the world would witness a different Operation Barbarossa, one that might succeed. With no resources diverted to North Africa or worries over American supply convoys, Hitler could focus his entire military might on Eastern Europe. The Wehrmacht, mighty and elite, with millions of soldiers and tens of thousands of tanks, would flood across the Ukrainian plains, closing in on Moscow faster than ever. Moscow, in that scenario, would likely fall by late 1941 or early 1942. And once the political and symbolic heart of the Soviet Union collapsed, the rest of the Soviet Empire would crumble under the pressure. Without American Lend-Lease aid to the USSR, no Studebaker trucks, no fighter planes, no food or fuel to sustain the Red Army, resistance would falter. Stalin might be overthrown or forced into a humiliating peace. Vast Soviet territories, from the Baltics, Belarus, to Ukraine, could fall into German hands. Fertile lands would become Lebensraum, living space for Germans, as Hitler had outlined in Mein Kampf. Meanwhile, Britain, without American support, without hope of a Western counteroffensive, would face a dire crossroads. Winston Churchill, with his oratory, might rally the British people for a time. But cold reality would prevail. A small island nation could not stand alone against an entire continent under German rule. By 1942 or 1943, Britain might face a brutal economic and military blockade. Without transatlantic aid, Britain would slowly wither. Cities bombed relentlessly, food supplies dwindling, morale collapsing. Eventually, London might have to accept an armistice, or even a peace treaty with Germany. Then, Hitler would achieve his dream, a Europe unified under the iron heel of the Third Reich. But what would that new order look like? How would it sustain itself across a diverse and volatile continent? And could the Nazi regime itself maintain power in a world without war, yet riddled with covert schemes and seeds of rebellion? To answer that, we must delve deeper, step by step, into that shadowed world. The fall of free Europe. Without American intervention, Europe's fate would take a dark turn. By the end of 1941, Britain, alone against the Nazi storm, would face life-or-death decisions. In reality, the Battle of Britain saw the Luftwaffe try to bomb London into submission. But imagine, with no hope of transatlantic rescue, with every signal from Washington confirming America's non-intervention, would British resilience hold? One plausible scenario: after years of relentless bombing, Britain negotiates. An armistice, not total surrender, but recognition of German control over Western Europe, leaving Britain in a vulnerable neutrality. Occupied France, Belgium, and the Netherlands would be locked under puppet regimes. In the East, without Lend-Lease, the USSR would fight alone. Operation Barbarossa, Germany's invasion of the Soviet Union, might still happen, but with greater force. Not because of magical reinforcements, but because Germany no longer feared a Western front. Hundreds of thousands of troops, thousands of tanks, and tons of supplies could be shifted east. In that scenario, would Stalingrad hold? Could Leningrad endure 900 horrific days without Allied aid? Perhaps Moscow would fall in the winter of 1941 to 1942, a victory that slipped through Germany's fingers in reality. And if Moscow fell, Stalin's regime might collapse, shattering the USSR into chaos. A German puppet government in Moscow? A Nazi-fied Western Russia? This nightmare would no longer be unthinkable. Thus, Europe would enter a new era, the new order Hitler dreamed of. A continent ruled from the Atlantic to the Urals. France, the Netherlands, Belgium, Denmark, Norway, all under Berlin's shadow. In the south, Mussolini's Italy would cling to power, but only as a weak German-dependent ally. And if you think resistance movements would rise and overthrow the Reich, ask yourself, how long could rebellions last without weapons, funding, or international recognition? Small uprisings, French patriots, Polish partisans, would be crushed by the Gestapo and SS. Any spark of dissent would be smothered in its cradle. Could the USSR recover? Could Britain reignite the fight? The answer here is bleak. No superpower would lead the way. No Normandy 1944. No Berlin falling in 1945. Europe would suffocate under totalitarian boots. What comes next? If this trajectory held, Germany would cement its power. A network of puppet states, a pro-German France, a reshaped Netherlands, and eastern territories where native populations faced oppression or forced assimilation. But could absolute power last? Would internal contradictions, economic, ethnic, ideological, slowly erode the regime? This is where we must look deeper: the slow but certain emergence of resistance, the potential rise of liberation movements, and the inevitable mistakes of an empire too greedy to control a continent forever. Imagine, in Parisian alleys, secret leaflets still circulate; in Polish forests, small groups train with old rifles; in Moscow's basements, surviving intellectuals vow to overthrow their occupiers. History never stays silent, even under extreme violence. So without America, would Europe truly enter an endless night? Or could hope still sprout from the darkness? As we continue, let's explore this new order further, a world where Germany not only wins but tries to maintain its victory for decades. In this hypothetical 1950s, if Nazi control held, a new society would form. From Lisbon to Kiev, Oslo to Athens, a coerced, or reluctantly compliant, network would bow to Berlin. The German capital, in this vision, would be no ordinary city. Hitler dreamed of Germania, a megalopolis of grand boulevards and colossal buildings. Picture massive parades, hundreds of thousands of soldiers marching under towering stone statues. Paris, the city of light, would be stifled in shadow. Cafes and museums might remain open, but all would carry a forced silence. Banned music, burned books, whispered stories of disappeared loved ones. No grand uprisings, just quiet acts, a wall scrawled with Liberté, a courier caught in the night. In Eastern Europe, Poland, Ukraine, Belarus, repression would be harsher. Resettlement programs, resource extraction, forced assimilation. A generation raised in German-speaking schools, taught of imperial superiority, but beneath the surface, hearts simmer with hatred. Economically, with Europe under its thumb, Germany would exploit and build a vast production network. French, Dutch, and Belgian industries would be harnessed. Eastern railways would funnel grain, oil, and/or west. A European common market, dictatorship style, where all profits flowed to Berlin. But absolute power cannot hide growing cracks. Dissent would fester even among loyalists. Aging generals would feud. Local leaders would grow corrupt, weakening the system. The economy, initially booming from plunder, would stagnate under rigid control. Most crucially, a new generation, raised post-war, untouched by the chaos of the 1930s, would ask, "Why must we obey?" These questions, small and silent at first, would spread like fissures through the Reich's seemingly unbreakable stone. Without America, without liberation, the world would enter a suffocating night, where freedom, democracy, and human rights were exiled to memory. But no night lasts forever. In that world, in Warsaw's damp cellars, Paris's dim attics, Moscow's hidden bunkers, people would still pass along old stories, of lost republics, crushed rebellions, undying dreams. A century of domination might slow history's wheel, but not stop it. And then, perhaps one day, not in the 1950s or even the 1970s, but later, new movements would rise. Not from grand battles, but from millions of small, stubborn acts. A band song sung in a crowd. A toppled statue in the night. An old flag raised in secret. History, in the end, belongs to those who never abandon hope.